in 2008, when in Moscow, around Moscow, there were fires in the peatlands and fertilizer exports were basically stopped, we ended up with food prices around the world spiking. That spike of food prices ended up driving riots in 60 cities around the world. And some would argue, and that's been well thought through, catalyzed the Arab Spring. So this was just fires outside Moscow that triggered a whiplash effect, accelerating inequality and destabilization. So when we often talk about these futures, and this is another one, Madrid looking at 8.5 degrees warmer, and just to give you some context of what that means, 8.5 degrees or 7.5 degrees total warmth means more domestic violence, more people falling asleep while driving, more people actually, transformers breaking down, rails which were designed for certain temperatures no longer functioning, so you get a breakdown of those rails, logistics supplies becoming more vulnerable, maintenance supply becoming more vulnerable. You have this cascade effect. One of the messages I want to put forward to you is that it's unlikely we're going to face a smooth transition. Often I sit in rooms and people sort of say, we'll just smoothly go from where we are, from petrol vehicles to electric vehicles, from homegrown X to sort of X grown nearby in different formats. It looks more and more likely we're facing a volatile transition. A transition where we will actually start to move, and the conversations I'm seeing is a move from effectively move towards rebuilding our infrastructures, energy, water, minerals, cognitive security, nutrition cycle, rebuilding our primary infrastructures. I think we're moving from the age of enterprise to the age of infrastructure again. And that opens up a whole series of questions about, in that era, what happens to the consumer goods markets and all the consumer derivatives that are actually very difficult to drive smoothly. Unfortunately, I think we're about to see many territories not being able to preserve stability. In contexts like volatility, most of our states or governing vehicles are designed for stable environments. So as soon as we have high levels of volatility, many states will turn authoritarian, because when you pool risk and accountability to states, their capacity to manage that tends to make them control-orientated. It's not about personalities. It's about the nature of volatility and our current state structures actually not able to deal with the accelerating volatility. So one of the things that we've really got to start looking ahead at is, how do you make states systemically anti-fragile? What is the role of civil society in holding state infrastructure and private infrastructure to account? In the UK, we're having one of the most interesting conversations I find we're talking about building a fourth parliament, a citizens' assembly with a citizens' litigation fund attached to it. Why? Because actually you give power into civil society to hold these structures to account in ages of volatility. So how is power constructed? How do we build power that creates pathways for good operation of states becomes really critical. How do you stabilize a glacier environment? How do you renew a river system? How do you actually manage a hydrological cycle upstream and downstream in the face of AMOC disruption? How do you renew a bioregion as pieces of infrastructure? And when you start to look at these sorts of activities, all the way to working with one city in Northern Europe, to say, how do you improve human development, not as a unit by single thing, but as a whole city investment in human machine development? So you start to think about these problem spaces in a fundamentally different way. And the hope starts here. There's no pathway for people to isolate themselves from this risk. So number one thing I've often heard when I stood into a room and somebody will say, look, Indy, we'll get down to 1 billion people. And I was like, interesting. And why do you think it'll stop at 1 billion? And the problem is, I don't think there's a way that we can stop that crisis. Once we go down the cycle of war, we will self-terminate. Lots of good reasons I can tell you. We did some work on the new war calculus. It's very difficult to stop. And when you look at that scenario, that basically leaves us with one choice: mutually assured thriving. Because every other pathway leads us to mutually assured destruction. And in that sense, that's where I start to get hopeful. Because I think when you're faced with that choice of it being only about mutually assured thriving, we start to open up into a new way of thinking about the future. And what we value, and what we price, and how we organize it. And it requires us to also reimagine what it means to be human. I think one of the most systemic questions, if we're not able to ask, is how do we value being human? And a unit of labor as it's currently conceived is insufficient to value the potential of what it means to be human. And I think this is going to be one of the epistemic questions. Because if we can't, I guarantee you the war machine will effectively drive large-scale human conflict. I think we're living in an age where we're being forcibly re-entangled. The delusion of separation, the delusion of divisibility no longer works as climate breakdown and other effects forcibly re-entangle us at the planetary scale. They are eroding a delusion of the last 400 years where we saw the world in objecthood and subjecthood and separation. And the science of this has already been in place for maybe 70 odd years. But culturally, it's an invitation to operate in a new theory of entanglement. Culturally, it's a place to operate in a new theory of an explosion of agency, of life. Seeing everything as life as opposed to seeing everything as dominion and dead things. Because we're going to have to operate embracing complexity, operate embracing entanglement, not operate in the illusion of boundaries. And what we're being invited to in this crisis is a metamorphosis of not only our environment and how we perceive it, but a fundamental deep code transformation of how we imagine ourselves and our relationship to the planet in radical formats. When I look into this problem, I now see an opportunity and a way of perceiving a transformation that is much deeper than just merely EVs. And I think that is the invitation. And that is why here at RMIT and Planetary Civics Inquiry, there's an inquiry to explore what it means to manifest in this form of knowledge. And it changes literally everything. Even how we imagine what it means to be human. You'll see in one of my Substacks I talk about, if you put significant neuroscientists in the room, they would say, well, there's a good likelihood that consciousness is, that not only is the planet becoming consciousness, that consciousness perhaps is a download. Right? It's the essential component in the whole universe. And that would challenge all the Copernican revolution we were in the middle of. Because it would recenter consciousness as the center of the universe. So I think we're living in a moment of rather extraordinary transformations of everything we've talked about and believed. And there's no one else coming to do this for us. So the question is, how do we open up this conversation? What I found extraordinary in the last year is this conversation, which typically I would have had only in private, in small groups. I've been having them with capital holders. And two major capital holders said to me, Indy, we anticipate in the next 30 years, we will lose 90% of our wealth. 90% in the next 30 years. That was their conversation about their own perception of wealth. And suddenly they were saying, we need to think differently about our theory of entanglement. Our wealth is fundamentally entangled with the planet, non-divisibly slow. You've probably heard me say on one of my speeches, there is no viable New Zealand strategy. You're Aussies, so you'll appreciate it more. So in that context, if we're all entangled, I think it's inviting a completely different type of conversation. So everything I've said, start to see as a strategic opportunity and a need from our generation. There will be no space to hand over to another generation. You are the generation. We do it or we don't. And that, I think, is both an opportunity, but an invitation to look smack bang into the darkness and look for the hope, the real hope that's available and visible in front of us. But it requires us to look at the numbers and through the numbers to the scale of the transformation. And I think it's radical beyond belief. Thank you.